Hello and welcome to Concours Coach Conversations, the podcast for EU contractual staff who want to go permanent and perform at their best along the way. I'm your host and coach, Neil Urker, and every few weeks I bring you practical advice, real experiences, and honest conversations to help you succeed in the internal competitions, from the written case study to the oral presentation and competency-based interview. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Celynn Morin, who is the performance and well-being whisperer. What a great name, Celynn. And we're going to talk a bit about some of her expertise. She's an expert on building sustainable habits to reduce fatigue and exhaustion, switch off and sleep well, reduce stress, feeling overwhelmed and burnout, combat anxiety, depression, disengagement, decrease dissatisfaction with work-life balance, and stay healthy despite busy lives. One of the things that I really love about you, Celynn, is your joie de vivre. It's a lovely, appropriate French word or phrase, because you're all about being celebratory, all about enjoying the moment, and it's not just about health and wellness being overwhelming and time consuming. So Celynn, welcome to the show.
Gosh, what a wonderful intro. Thank you, Neil. And hello to everyone who's watching and listening.
So is there anything from that introduction you think I should have included?
Well, I'm really delighted.
What's something my viewership should know?
I think the most important thing is what you ended with, which is the joie de vivre. Because, translated from French, that means joy of living. And what else is there, actually? And I think, considering the audience, I understand the enormity of the stress that we can be under, the expectations, the milestones, the desire to pass, to succeed. But in that process, and we'll unpack that, right, how important it is not to forget about living and choosing to be joyful, whether or not we've passed anything, but because we are existing and able to even try. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, my clients and the people who are taking internal competitions who work at the European Union institutions, they put enormous pressure on themselves. They work super hard. They're already doing a very difficult and hard job, which they're devoting 8, 10, 12 or more hours per day working. They might be working at weekends. They might go away on missions. They might be going to the parliament in Strasbourg, and very intense work lives. And then for a year or more, they're preparing for these life-changing exams. I don't think really in the modern world this happens very often. These are life-changing exams. They pass. They get a job for life, amazing career in a prestigious international organization, good salary, good benefits, good pension, and a great career development and working in international environment, a very tangible, life-changing thing for them. That really people get married, they have babies, they buy homes. They really after this. So there's a lot of pressure on themselves. And then sometimes they don't pass. They told other colleagues and they don't pass. Maybe we'll start a little dive in the deep end. Because you mentioned something there, what would you say then? And how would you respond? Or what would you be, if you were coaching somebody in that situation, what would you be saying to them?
The first thing I think I would say is a lot of us have a lot of respect for elite athletes. It can be any sport, from tennis to running to skating, anything really. And we often don't think of ourselves as elite or professional athletes, but everybody that will be listening to this conversation is most certainly a cognitive athlete. So there's this not only desire, but dependence on sustaining brain thinking, remembering, learning, and for a very long period of time. And so I think that's a very good starting point, is how can you nurture, treat, train yourself as a cognitive athlete and not just somebody who's going through a certain exam for a life-changing event? Because that, I think, shifts the lens a bit, because we can build on this, but we know that elite athletes need to eat well, rest well, breathe well, hydrate well. manage their emotions. So there are so many connections that we can then say, well, am I eating well, nourishing, sleeping? What's my inner critic saying, or my inner champion?
Yeah. Yes. Inner critic or inner champion. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the inner critic, but I haven't heard that inner champion. That's a lovely phrase. Yeah.
Or cheerleader, but I think champion's nice.
What was the other one?
Cheerleader.
Oh yeah, inner cheerleader. Yeah, that's good. Right?
Yeah.
Someone on your side, right? Someone on your side.
Yes.
So what would you say? How, if you had a cognitive athlete, what kinds of things would you be focusing on? What kinds of questions would you be asking them, and things would you be encouraging them to do?
I encourage the cognitive athletes that I work with. So I work with a lot of senior leadership teams who, I guess we're all under pressure of different kinds. I mean, I do appreciate the enormity of what everybody here is under, and it's not just a short sprint. It definitely is a marathon. So I would be curious about whether everyone is being curious about their own inner AI. So we live in the age of AI, artificial intelligence, and we also have our own, what I call ancient intelligence.
Oh, right.
Inner AI, and that is, of course, the brain. So we just spoke about being a cognitive athlete. So this brain that thinks and problem solves and needs to stay creative. But we also have emotional intelligence, which is all around the heart. And we know that the heart actually impacts the brain more than the other way around, which is super interesting for us to explore. And then we have our intuition, our intuitive intelligence, or the gut, which we now know is often referred to as the second brain. So I would say, are you fully leveraging those inner intelligences so that you're not just forcing through, because you can learn a piece of work, but if you manage your emotional well-being and you use your intuition, learning can be not only faster, also easier and more embodied. So that could be also a good starting point for us to explore.
And what kinds of tips would you be giving to people to manage their emotional intelligence, managing their emotional state through this long process? Sometimes up to a year, sometimes it's multiple years, missing family occasions, missing social occasions, studying at weekends when they're already doing a long job or a difficult job during the week.
So there are two foundational pillars that any elite athlete would absolutely focus on. The first one is strategic rest and sleep. So understanding recovery, because a lot of us, or those listening and watching, will be feeling tired, but perhaps not because they're doing too much, but because they're not recovering properly. So we can talk about, and I use the term strategic recovery because it's not just about getting sleep, because sometimes you can't get a good night's sleep. So there's many other things that you can do to help the nervous system to feel like it's had a bit of a rest. And then the other pillar would be the breath. The breath is a very powerful ancient tool, and it helps the head, the heart, and the gut. So it's like you get win-win-win. So perhaps we can also explore how the breath can impact learning, memory recall, manage our state, help us to stay calm under pressure, which is incredibly important, especially when it comes to, I know this is exactly part of what you train, that those milestone touch points and examinations.
Yeah. What would strategic rest and recovery, what would that look like? What's an example of strategic rest and recovery? You mentioned like you can't always get a good night's sleep. What would that look like? What are bite-sized pieces or some simple things people could do?
So when you're studying this hard and working and using so much of this 3-pound universe or 2-kilogram universe that sits on our shoulders, it's a bit like, our devices, we always charge them when we see they're starting to run flat, and often they don't even get near the red bar. But so often we can be very tired, but so wired because the brain just keeps going. And I've been curious about when you're not studying, because of course there will be moments in the day when we are not working and studying. What are you doing then? So are you choosing to get pulled into what we call infinity scrolling or doom scrolling, which is just more stimulus exactly through this device? Or are you going out to nature? So the more time you spend thinking and in front of screens and working and taking in stimulus, the more time you should be going into nature. So I would say as a priority, and weather permitting, but when you can, is get fresh air, because a walk, even if it is just 10 minutes, will do much more recovery for your nervous system. And we know now that even when you look at open horizons and you see the different colors in nature, it boosts your immune system, it helps your blood pressure regulate, and it helps your mental health. In Japan, the doctors actually prescribe time in nature. It's called forest bathing. So if somebody comes in and they're feeling depressed or anxious, yeah. And I mean, you're quite connected to Japan, if I remember, Neil.
I lived in Japan for 6 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
you have time in nature. This is what doctors prescribe for you: forest bathing. Yes.
Yeah.
What's inside that? Why did they say forest bathing? I know, but maybe.
Well, so the idea is that you would go spend time in a natural environment like a forest, but it could be whatever's approachable for you. It could even be your back garden, or it could be sitting next to a pot plant. But the idea is not having a screen, so no social media, and then using your senses, your sight, your smell, your sense of taste and touch, really noticing the colors, hearing the sounds, bringing your awareness to, if you're walking, like how your feet feel as you're going across where it is that you might be walking, and what you can see around you. And that's incredibly therapeutic and restorative for the nervous system.
Absolutely. I even in Brussels, which is a biggish city, or Luxembourg, or other cities where people may be living and working for the European Union institutions, there's parks, there's a forest, little or larger parks nearby. In Brussels, there's a forest that's very accessible. So anytime you can get out into that, that's what I tell people. Yeah.
And if you can, sit against a tree or lie down and look up. There's a lot of science, and this also comes from the forest bathing, of noticing light coming down through trees and leaves. This stuff is not woo-woo anymore. We have the science now to measure it. We can see what happens to people's stress response, the immune system. It's incredible. So as much time in nature as you can to balance out the screen time is one way to bring in strategic rest.
Absolutely. You can see that in real time. You can see people's heart rates dropping, stress levels dropping. Absolutely. My association with forest bathing is something I remember, which is that actually you are being bathed in the essential oils of the forest. The trees are transmitting the oils, the essential oils. You can't see it, but they're sending that out. And actually, when you walk through the forest, you're getting those natural scents, natural oils, and you're walking through them, which also builds that health. That's how we evolved. We didn't evolve living in brick boxes, right?
Exactly.
So, glass and steel. Yeah.
And also in nature, there's a lot of geometry and things like the Fibonacci spiral, where we don't consciously look at a tree branch and notice it, but the mind sees, and those patterns are calming and soothing.
Natural. Yeah.
And the lights are all like different shades of green and blues and browns compared to this now. Like, I'm looking at the screen and I can see all the beautiful colors behind you, but they're bright and the screen's bright. And so there is scientific support for spending time in nature. Very good for the nervous system.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned breath being important for the head, the heart, and the gut. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So a lot of us take our breath for granted, right? Because we don't have to think about it. Thank goodness. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. You just breathe. Generally, global research shows that we're not breathing properly. So if you look at a baby or a young child breathing, especially if they're lying down on their back, you can see that they breathe into their tummy. That's because the diaphragm is loose, and that's the muscle that then expands as you take a deep breath in. But as we get not just older, but more stressed, and we spend a lot of time behind screens, and certainly if you're studying and working behind a screen and at a desk, we tend to brace ourselves. So the shoulders will go up. I know that I clench my jaw, and that's part of the fight, flight, freeze response. What that does, though, is it can cause you to take very shallow, light breaths, and you use very little of your lung capacity. And so we're not getting in the kind of oxygen, and we don't regulate carbon dioxide and pH levels, and that can make us feel anxious. So your breath, I mean, I do so many different breathing exercises with my corporate clients because it can give you insight into your nervous system, what's happening. And it can also be a tool that you can use real time. Right now, we can bring
let's do one right now so that everybody else who's watching it can just go along with us and experience that. Maybe beforehand, just before that, it's like, notice how you're feeling right now. How do you feel? Just notice how you're feeling in terms of your mind, in terms of your gut, in terms of your heart, your energy levels. Are you wired and tired? Are you full of energy and beans? How do you feel right now? Just notice that, and just take a moment to notice that. Celynn, over to you.
And then what I invite you to do is perhaps place one hand on your chest and one hand just above your navel towards the center of your rib cage. It's a nice way to bring your awareness to this upper part of your body. And then without changing anything, because there's nothing to get right, you can't get this wrong, it's not a competition, is to start noticing your breath. And there's 4 places in your body where you can notice your breath. It's your nose, if you're breathing in through your nose. You might notice the cold air coming through your nostrils. It's very, very important to breathe through our nose. A lot of us are not breathing through our nose. We're breathing through our mouths. So the mouth and the back of the throat is the second part of the body where you might notice the breath. And then there's the upper chest. As you breathe in, you might notice the upper hand slightly moving. And if you are breathing and expanding deep into your belly by using your diaphragm and all your lungs, you might notice the bottom hand moving as you breathe. So the first thing with any exercise around managing stress and helping your nervous system or strategic recovery is to come to this point of awareness, because we get caught up in our heads and it's so easy to disconnect from our body. What I'm going to do over the next minute or so is invite you to bring your awareness to wherever you might be feeling the breath. So coming in through your nostrils, if that's comfortable for you to do. Notice if it moves down through your throat, and then notice how your chest might lift and expand, but also can you, as you breathe in, let your bottom hand move out so that you start using more of your diaphragm, more of your lungs, and opening up your ribs. They can often feel quite tight because of the stress and the time we spend sitting, studying, working. And I also invite you to let your eyes, your gaze maybe soften, looking down, and if you feel comfortable and it's safe to do so, to let your eyes close just for a moment, a minute. Our eyes take in so much stimulus. It's really good for the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, to get a break from processing all the stimulus that comes in. So soften your gaze, close your eyes. I invite you to, if it's comfortable for you to do so, to breathe in for 3 counts. So 3, 2, 1, and exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Find a rhythm that feels comfortable for you. You don't want to force anything. The idea is to make your exhale longer than the inhale. And if you're able to breathe in and out through the nose. Very, very important to train ourselves to nasal breathe. I can explain why a little bit later. And then one last exercise that I always do myself as a professional speaker and with many of my audiences is on your next inhale, as you breathe in for 3 or 4 counts, whatever feels comfortable for you right now, is to say to yourself in your mind's eye, strong back. So breathe in. And what I mean by that, I mean elongate your posture in a comfortable way. Imagine there's like a cord lifting up through the top of your head. So your posture lifts. Immediately you create more space in your upper body to breathe. And then on the exhale, which is longer than your inhale, hopefully, I'd like you to say to yourself in your mind's eye, Soft front. What I mean by that is to soften the front of your face and your body, your neck, your shoulders, your jaw. We carry so much tension in the front of the body. It's exhausting and it makes it difficult to breathe. So inhale, strong back. And exhale, long, slow exhale, and say to yourself, soft front, and let your jaw soften, your tongue drop in your mouth, let your shoulders drop towards the ground, let your chest soften, releasing tension that you don't want to carry. And take one last nourishing breath, the deepest, most nourishing breath you've taken all day. Strong back and soft front, a long, gentle, slow exhale. And then very slowly, if your eyes have been closed, to open them and slowly let the light back in. Let your hands fall comfortably where they want to. And then perhaps, Neil, we can recalibrate. Notice how you feel after that.
Yeah. I really feel, I do martial arts. I do Aikido a lot, done it for 30 years. Breathing into the belly is one of the first things that we learn, breathing into the belly, expanding the tanden. We call it the hara. The hara is the area, and the tanden is the point. So expanding that. But it's so important to do that. And I just feel totally different. I didn't notice that I was carrying a bit of tension in my shoulders, and I just dropped it. And that standing up, I talk about a marionette or a puppet, but that being lifted up. Yes. So the main thing for me was like, I was just subconsciously going down a little bit, and then now, it just feels like, I just feel more relaxed. That's
Neil, I also when we are relaxed, so much magic happens. And Absolutely. I use the word magic because you make better decisions, you come across as more confident, you shift your internal chemistry, you release dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, as opposed to cortisol, which can shut off your memory. That's why, and I'm sure that some of, would you refer to your students as students?
I say clients.
Clients, yeah.
They're candidates in the competition.
Candidates. So candidates, it's so easy. Even myself, if I present professionally, but I can have moments where if I let my inner critic get on board and I stop breathing, I totally go into the stress response. My hands get cold. I can't, my mouth gets dry. I can't think, even though I know exactly what to say. So for high stakes meetings and exams, this strong back, soft front can really help you to keep a strong back, like know where you stand, be firm, but stay open so that you can still breathe, you can communicate, you can think, you can feel, you can use your intuition, which is your inner wisdom. So if this is the one thing you take from anybody, listening to this, takes this technique and practices it, you don't need to do it with your eyes closed. In fact, I do it sometimes when I'm driving, I do it while I'm presenting, while I'm online. Practice it, because nobody knows more about your health and well-being and your ability to be resilient and stay mentally online than you. But if you don't practice it, you're never going to use it in those high-stakes environments. A professional elite athlete practices so that at the race, they do well. So we need to practice these techniques.
Absolutely. I talk about when you're relaxed, you have access to your forebrain, your neocortex, but particularly these two nodes at the front where you're able to think strategically, think creatively, access memory. And otherwise you're going into your mammal brain, your amygdala, and you can't really process or create new experiences there. You can't think strategically and creatively. So especially in those pressure moments, that's absolutely right. I also talk about Michael Phelps, who's an Olympic champion swimmer. And what he does is that he visualizes, he's doing his breathing, of course, but he's also visualizing things going wrong and still succeeding. So things going wrong, but then water going in the goggles. He hasn't done a perfect jump, but then he still succeeds. So that's a powerful technique. Is the breathing, is the seeing, is the practicing of these kinds of things to help you perform, because you've been practicing hundreds of times before you go on stage. just because you've got years of experience. You're still doing it as part of your daily practice, and then you're doing it whilst you're standing on stage and speaking as well. Same for my clients. They should be, and they're taught to be, doing this breathing so during the exam rather than during the written exam, during their presentation or interview. Absolutely. I want to go back a little bit, Celynn. What got you into, I met you in 2018 when we were doing this long-term course on embodiment and working as trainers and coaches with people and bringing more of their body into their work. But how did you get where you are today? What would you say is your story, not your little, but your story? What's your connection, maybe, because I haven't talked about any of that, like maybe to the listeners, because I know you were born in South Africa, is that right?
Yes, I was born in South Africa.
But European connection?
Strong European connection, and I now live in Europe, which is fabulous. My parents are both French. They left France to go to South Africa, and they spent 53 years in South Africa, but they're now back in France, and I have moved close to them just to be with them in their older age. So I'm living now in France and really enjoying being, I guess, a proper European, because I never really felt Europe. So, and I still work a lot in the UK, so I'm back with a lot of clients there at least once a month. And
You're bilingual. You're bilingual, right?
Yes, yeah, oui. Je sais qu'il y a des candidats qui vont comprendre le français. Yes, I got into this because I always knew as a young child and a teenager that I wanted to be a healer of some kind. I had a very lovely sense of awe with my pharmacist, because my mum, we weren't sick very often, and we would always go to the pharmacist and get advice. And so I thought I wanted to be a pharmacist or a doctor. But then I discovered, when I was looking at the medical faculty of the university I went to, that dietetics was a part of their offering, which is a degree in dietetics. So I qualified as a dietitian in 2000, and I went into clinical practice. So I would see a lot of people with diabetes, heart disease, irritable bowel syndrome, so nutrition related conditions. And I got quite frustrated because people don't change their behaviors very easily. And so I started looking into psychology and human behavior, and that's how I got into neuroscience and behavioral science. I also had the opportunity to work with Vitality and BankMed, which were health insurers that started in South Africa that understood workplace well-being. And the idea of, if you help employees understand their health and potentially diagnose them before they get a condition, you just save a lot of money in terms of absenteeism and presenteeism. So from about 2008, I started doing professional speaking in companies, and now I do that full time. So I love working with often groups of leaders or high-performing individuals like the candidates, and helping them not just from a nutritional point anymore, because now I'm qualified in various dimensions of well-being, but holistically, how do you manage your energy and performance so that you can not only perform well, but also keep a joie de vivre, because that's very important for me. It's enjoying every day, not just living till that one moment.
Yes, because life is going to go on afterwards.
Yes,
Life is not over. Life is not over. It's just, or it's not beginning. It's just a continuation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's a Zen phrase, but chop wood, carry water. Right? That's what you're doing each day. You're chopping wood, you're carrying water, and that will still happen even after you pass the exam too. You mentioned a term there which some people might not be familiar with: presenteeism. What is that? Absenteeism. What's that?
Yeah. So absenteeism is when somebody is absent from work. We know that there's a cost, right? So, I mean, if a senior executive gets to burnout, the cost of replacing them is enormous. I don't know what the current stats are, but it would be multiple times their salary, right? And we know that when someone, and you don't need to be a senior executive, there's a cost to the organization and of course to ourselves. But many of us are not, and I imagine the candidates are pushing through. And even when they're sick, they're still showing up, they're still working, they're still studying, because that's the nature of the high achievers, right?
Yeah.
But when you're not working at your best, when you're maybe working at a 7 out of 10, or you're making mistakes and tasks are taking you longer than they should, there's a cost to that. You know, you can also start to feel, some employees start to feel disengaged, and they can become, even if they don't intend to, but quite toxic just by, you know, they're there, but they're not really there. It's like the lights are on, but there's no sparkle.
Yeah, they're just sort of grinding through the day. Like, oh God, another
Yeah.
day. Can't wait to the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's one thing I've seen a lot in the institutions. I've been working in the European Union institutions for 22 years now. I've seen a lot of burnout. People not, because it's a service, it's a values driven organization. So it's not profit driven, it's values driven. It's a civil service. So it's a sense of service, and people go above and beyond the call of duty because they want to help their colleagues or they believe in the project. There's a real sense of service, and that can really cause more burnout. And the burnout now, so the institutions and the people and the candidates and the people watching are not really, they're not really so focused on the cost, the economic cost, but there's a cost to how much extra work you have to do if one of your team falls out and burns out, or for you getting back into your career, because of course you'll be supported through that burnout phase in terms of salary, but then coming back, how are you going to change your behavior?
And also, I think, Neil, what's important is, I mean, I myself I haven't been clinically diagnosed with burnout, because, you know, that's when you're actually, I mean, it can take you 12 to 18 months to bounce back. I've worked with patients who have been, and clients in clinical burnout, but there's a spectrum, and there are many signs along the way. And I know that I've been sometimes a bit further down on the spectrum than I'd like to be in terms of my energy. So one of the World Health Organization gives us 3 guidelines for how you identify burnout. And the one is, I mean, there's exhaustion, which is not replenished with sleep or time off. There's ineffectiveness, which means we start making mistakes, that your mind doesn't work, you forget things take you longer. And then there's cynicism, which is where things that usually give you joy don't. And that for me is important to notice, is something also because of my French heritage, and I currently live in Champagne, the region of Champagne. I'm crazy about Champagne.
I live in Champagne. I love that. I live inside last Champagne.
And I'm very intrigued by the alchemy of how a grape is converted into this elixir of universal joy, you know, because you don't need to drink alcohol to appreciate that. If you see somebody with a flute and a sparkling beverage, it could even be sparkling water or kombucha, we assume something. We assume there's a celebration, something good is happening. And I love that alchemy. And that ties into joie de vivre, is how can we create what I call champagne moments without champagne, but, you know, more often. And on the vineyards, a lot of vineyards, if you look at the end of the rows of vines, there's often rose bushes. And those roses are planted there, not, I mean, aesthetically, they look beautiful, but that would be very expensive exercise. And sometimes for biodynamic, organic farming, they contribute to how that process works. But primarily, the roses are there as an alarm system, because the roses will get affected by a particular mildew or aphid that then the caretaker of the vine, if they notice that the roses are struggling, know that they need to pay attention, because if they don't, they can lose the whole crop. So what for the candidates, I'd like to say, you know, do you know what your red flags are, your roses? When they start to wilt, it's like the canary in the mine. And that can be mental things, it can be emotional things, it can be physical things. For me, it's that loss of joy. If I start isolating myself, I don't have energy to go out. If I notice that I crave more sugar, more food, if I spend endless time distracting myself with my phone, if I bite my nails and I clench my jaw. So those are signs that I know. If I don't pay attention to them, like if I start getting a twitch in my eye, then I know my nervous system is tired. I need to get a good night's sleep, maybe spend some time in nature, or just give myself a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What might be other signs? Sorry, go. I forgot to interrupt you.
No, so that's because it's, you know, I work a lot with people who wouldn't say they're burnt out, but they're tired.
Yeah.
And so let's try to replenish ourselves so we don't get to the point of burnout, because working with that and bouncing back from that is sometimes not even possible. You know, I've worked with very senior, high performing cognitive athletes that are never quite back at the level that they were, or they make complete career changes, which we don't want to have to get to, especially not with these candidates. Yeah.
Absolutely. What would you say are, with people that you work with, what would you say are signs of the decline of the roles, in mental, emotional, or physical? You mentioned some, like twitch in the eye, something like that. But what would you say are other signs that you've experienced or that maybe people don't expect?
People don't expect, because an obvious one, I think, is the ruminating. So, where you're so tired physically, but so wired that you can't sleep at night. Waking up at night is not normal. Once in a while, like maybe, but if it's happening more than once a week, that is a sign there's too much going on for your mind. And then there are techniques to help you to manage that. Also,
what kind of techniques would you say? Are we talking like yoga nidra, that kind of thing?
Yes, so guided visualizations that can help you relax. But also, before you get to bed at night, is pen and paper, free flow writing, even just for 3 or 4 minutes. Not on your phone. So no screen. It's got to be writing where you give your mind permission to put down all the things that it might be thinking about, and then you leave that paper quite close to your bed. And somehow, for many of my clients, that acts as okay, it's there. I can rest now. And if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, ideally don't pick up your phone, but rather than write what's on your mind. And if you've practiced yoga nidra, or what Andrew Huberman refers to it as NSDR, non-sleep deep rest protocols, like body scanning, box breathing, there's so many different techniques. The idea is to experiment with a few and find one, just one that you like, and then use that one. Yeah.
So waking up at night is one of them. What's something else?
Noticing that your threshold or your tolerance, especially with the people that you care about the most, like if you're snappy with your loved ones, or if your kids are making you irritated, or if you're not fully present, you can't stop thinking about what, studying or work. And that, then I would say you could then use a lot of the techniques you and I learned in 2018 around coming into the body. Because when you come into the body in the present moment, like feeling your feet on the floor, noticing your breath, bringing any of your senses, because you can't be in the future or the past when you're thinking about your feet, thinking about your breath, noticing your senses. Yeah. And that sense of cynicism. So if you lose joy for things, like Neil, you mentioned the martial arts. And for me, I love partner dancing. I do jive and salsa and West Coast swing. And if I don't want to go dancing, that's a big alarm bell for me. I'm like, why am I that tired at that one thing? And I'm hoping that everyone listening to this conversation has something that they feel good about, a hobby. And if you don't have, that's another conversation we can have, because, to get, even if you get the job and the position, it's important for us to have a full life that includes either community or purpose or giving back or learning. Is, part of the neuroscientists tell us that when we learn new things through hobbies or sports or languages or instruments, or even just reading about a different place, it's good for the brain. It helps with neurogenesis,
Yeah, absolutely. If I have something outside of work that's completely unrelated.
Yes.
One of the things I like about doing Aikido, although I've been doing it a very long time, and I still an instructor, I'm not the teacher, but is that I'm the student. So I'm still learning. Every time I feel like I'm learning something. Doesn't matter, I've done it many, many years, but I'm still learning something. Every time I feel like I'm learning something. I like being in that position of the learner, and it's healthy for me as well.
Yeah.
Great. So
I've just started playing an instrument, which is very frustrating.
Oh yeah, what instrument are you playing?
The handpan. It's a drum.
Oh yeah.
Which you don't need to be able to read music to play it. But when I practice a little bit for long enough, like if I do it like every day for a week or two, I can just start to feel, we call it flow states.
Yes.
Elite athletes tap into, and cognitive athletes need to understand flow states. So before we end the conversation, we must talk about the brainwave activity that helps with flow states. But learning something new can be, initially frustrating, but when you start to get it right, you start feeling that sense of timelessness, richness, selflessness. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I talk about the 4 stages of learning anything. You probably heard this before, Celynn, but just for those who haven't, that it's unconscious incompetence at first. We don't
Yeah.
know we're bad at it. We can see somebody else doing it and we go, oh, that doesn't look that hard, I can do it. And then you start doing it, and then it's conscious incompetence, from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. Oh no, I'm so bad at it, I'm so terrible, I'm no good. So sometimes when I'm working with my clients who feel like they're not very good presenters, they can really experience that. Or when they're struggling with the writing and getting enough done in 90 minutes to get to exam standard, then you go from that, and the difficult journey is from there to conscious competence, is keeping going to conscious competence. So now I can do it. I still have to think about it, but I can do it. It's like learning to drive a car. I can do it, but I just have to think about it a little bit more. And then the last stage is unconscious competence. I can do it without even thinking. So it's that journey, that frustrating journey from suddenly I'm aware I'm not doing it very well to, I can do it, but I have to think about it, but I can do it. Let's get into that stage. So that's great. You look at hand pan, great.
Yes.
Let's go back. So that's learning, and that creates. I love that term. What did you said? Neurogenesis. That's a wonderful term. New term for me.
We know that at any age, the brain, and for the candidates and clients that are learning, so important to have neurogenesis, those synapses firing and the right neurochemistry, so that you remember, and not just that, you embody, and then that gives you wisdom. Because then you can use the right information at the right time in the right way.
One of the candidates I worked with previously, who was successful, by the way, she started doing improv comedy because she wanted to get more comfortable appearing in front of an audience and having to cope with getting it wrong, with being spontaneous, because that she didn't consider that one of her strengths before, and that completely transformed her. It was one of the reasons that transformed her performance, was being comfortable being on stage, messing up, or just being spontaneous, because she didn't previously consider that a strength. So that's definitely it's that genesis, or I call it neuroplasticity is another term, where your brain can change from your first breath to your last breath. You're capable of the change that you whatever it is. If it's not a physical impossibility like jumping to the moon, then you're capable of that if you set your mind to it and you keep going, get past that stage.
And what you just said, Neil, was beautiful. From your first breath to your last breath. So the first thing we do as we come into this world is breathe, inhale, and we exhale, expire as we transition. And that's just a link back to how important the breath is. It's something that's with us all the time, and we don't have to remember to pack it or subscribe to it. It's always there. And the more curious you get about your breath can help you if you need to go into flow states. The breath can help you to reduce anxiety. The breath can help you to energize if it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or it's the evening, or it's a Sunday, and you've still got like chapters to read and memory and remember. So the breath is a very important tool to be curious about.
Tell us more about that, Celynn. So you mentioned flow states and brain waves, reducing anxiety. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we know that the brain gives off, or the brain waves can be measured, and then the heart also gives off an electromagnetic field. And when you breathe, what we call a coherent breath. So coherent breath has been researched a lot by a HeartMath Institute, for instance. So if we breathe about 5 or 6 seconds in and 5 or 6 seconds out, that means taking maybe 8 to 10 breaths in a minute. That can bring you into what we call coherence. And then the message from the heart to the brain is that everything's calm. Don't panic. We're safe. Even though nothing in your environment might have changed, you've still got the same expectations, the same study load, the same deadlines. But if your breathing is slow and coherent, the message from your heart and your body to your brain is don't panic. What happens then is your brain, the waves, because if you're in the stress response, your brain waves are in what we call high beta brain wave, which is useful when you need to focus and run for that platform, because your train is going to depart from platform 9B and you need to get there in the next 30 seconds. But if you're in that state all the time, you're going to think about the times you've been really stressed. You miss the big picture. You make mistakes. You forget things. And So allowing our brain waves to slow down from high beta to drop into low beta, potentially even into the next layer, is called alpha brain state.
Yeah.
And alpha is when, I'm sure those of you listening will have had this experience where you think about something when you're showering or walking the dog or cooking or you're about to fall asleep and you're like, oh, I can't believe I forgot that, or I must phone that person. And that's when your intuition, your subconscious mind, which is where most of our wisdom sits, comes online, and we have aha moments. So aha moments are helpful when you're studying and learning and under pressure and you need to perform. And that doesn't happen by mistake, that happens by design. And part of it is regulating your breath and understanding that you can impact your brain waves moment by moment. Like right now, I can choose to get really stressed or let my inner critic come in and tell me I'm getting it wrong, or I should be saying this. And then my beta brain waves will increase and increase. I'll go into the fight or flight response. That's not going to help me, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a link there.
Yeah. You mentioned before that inner champion, the inner cheerleader. Tell us, how could the audience out there, how could they do that? How could they stimulate more of that, get away or quieten the inner critic to allow the inner champion to speak, or the inner cheerleader? What kind of techniques do you teach your clients to work or increase or improve or access the inner champion and the inner cheerleader?
Well, make friends with both of them, because you're never going to not have them around.
Yeah.
So, and what we suppress, we then express in unhealthy ways. So, this ties into, I guess we could call it shadow work, or, I've done some coaching around Jungian and archetypes. And so your inner critic, it can be helpful to maybe give that voice in your head a name and a persona. Like, mine's called Cami, and she's got a certain look. She's a bit disheveled and she's entitled, and she like sits there and like does this with her finger. But then I've also got Ange d'Or, which is the angel of gold, which is my champion, and she sparkles and she's toasting and popping champagne all the time. So I've got them both, and I find giving them a little bit of personality, for some people it might seem a bit over the top, but I think if we bring light to things and befriend them and make them, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, like with a child or somebody learning something new, we often use analogy and story and metaphor, and the subconscious mind likes that. So giving your inner critic, firstly, a little bit of a persona can help it to not feel that severe. And then a lot of people I work with haven't even thought about inner champion. We have space for this voice that tells us when we're getting it wrong, but what about when you get it right?
Celebrate.
Yes.
Celebrate.
Yes. And the researcher Brené Brown, who does a lot of work around vulnerability and authenticity and emotional regulation, speaks about how of all the emotions, the one that is the most difficult for us to feel is joy, because joy makes us feel vulnerable. Think about it. Like, when you allow yourself to feel joy, you are allowing yourself to potentially lose something, and that's very vulnerable. It's easier to be frustrated, angry, critical. And I think also understanding that has helped me to treat my little champion with a little bit more tenderness, and like, I know it's vulnerable, but let's try and look at the positive. Or, yes, I got that wrong, or I could have maybe done better, but at least I showed up,
Yeah.
And our thoughts release emotions, which release chemicals. So if you think critically, you're going to release different chemistry in your body to if you think like a champion. Or, a great example is, I'm sure a lot of the candidates must feel like there's not enough hours in the day, weeks in a month, and that exam's coming. And I don't have time to look after myself. I don't have time to sleep or to meditate or to spend time in nature. Like, what are Neil and Celynn talking about?
All this rubbish.
But we will never have done everything. Never. There will always be something to read, work to do, information to take in. So starting with that, we live in a world and an age, especially now, where there's always going to be something to take in.
Yes.
But even though we haven't done everything, we can get to a point of saying, I have done enough for now. For this moment, I'm going to take a half an hour break, and I'm going to go outside. I'm going to take a cup of tea and look out the window, because I know that natural light is good for my eyes. or I'm going to connect with someone that I care about because that's going to make me feel good, or I'm going to get to bed a little bit earlier so I can maybe sleep. So doing enough versus doing everything. And that isn't easy. It takes boundaries. But if you don't do it, no one's going to do it. And you're not going to show up at your best. Elite athletes rest, they stop, they have seasons on and seasons off. And so as much as possible within the context of a very difficult time, this year or two that demands so much, is to bring in some self-compassion and empathy and start small. It can be a mindful minute between meetings. It doesn't have to be a big meditation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much pressure on people, given with, we had the advent of the internet, the rise of computers. I remember my father, who was a civil servant as well, and he rarely brought work home because work was in the office. I mean, he might bring his bag home, and he might have done some work at home, but he certainly wasn't all weekend on his laptop typing, because laptops didn't exist. So it's finding that now in a 24/7 world, we feels like we've got to be on, we've got to be perfect, we've got to be more efficient and do things faster and better. You're seeing that with AI, where people are not using it to save time. They're ending up, they want to be more efficient, and that just becomes even faster and faster and faster and faster. And then they're doing extra, even more time devoted on their laptop or on their screen, because they're doing so much, they're achieving so much.
Yeah.
But that's
and I know you understand this because we are similar perhaps in that way. That is very addictive.
Yeah.
The ego likes that, ticking things off, and you start feeling like you don't have time to be human, because humans rest. Your nervous system deserves a diary. It deserves time off. We should transition between tasks and not just move straight into the one to the other to the other. It's why we're just so deflated and leading eventually to burnout.
Yeah. So it's like I say, we're not machines. We're biological entities. We need rest. We need that downtime. And I love that idea of the 1 minute rest. Some of my clients are just going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. I always program in half an hour in between my meetings. I don't always get half an hour because my meetings go over with my clients. They've got something that's difficult to deal with. But I always get up out of my chair, even if it's a minute. I'll get up out of my chair and I'll walk around. I'll do a stretch or I'll do something, even if it's going outside, just to take a breath. Then I'll do that too. Yeah.
Brilliant. And we haven't discussed it today, but perhaps I know, Neil, that you know about my Welculator, which is
yes.
But
I put that in the link. So everybody, Welculator, CelynnMorin.com/Welculator, WELLCULATOR. Is that right?
Yes. And what the Welculator is it takes 3 minutes to complete. Takes you through 4 categories that are important for showing up at your best mentally, emotionally, physically, and with a sense of meaning and connection. People love it because it gives them an immediate score. It's very practical. And then if you choose to, you can be in touch with me. I'll answer any questions. I personally read through all the emails, and I've curated about a year's worth of content, and I'm continually adding to it because I'm very passionate about helping high achieving individuals not give up their health in order to build a sense of prosperity or wealth, but to do both together.
And enjoyment of life, right? That joie de vivre that we talked about.
Yes. It's not either or, it's both and, to tie back to the contact or improvisation. Yeah.
Absolutely. What's a final message you'd like to leave with to say to the audience out there, the people who are doing these tough exams, they're doing difficult jobs and tough exams on top of that? What's a message that you'd like to leave them with?
I'd like to reinforce the message we just spoke about, that even though you may not have done everything, you've done enough. And that is worthy of celebration. Because when we allow ourselves to feel good, it doesn't have to be a grand affair. That is very good for our internal chemistry and our mindset.
Yeah, you've done enough. Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Celynn.
Thank
It's
you.
been a Absolute pleasure to speak to you. You consciously transmit that joie de vivre through the screen. I love it.
Très bien, très bien.
That's it for this episode of Concours Coach Conversations. If you found it useful, please like this, subscribe, share it with a colleague who's also preparing for the internal competitions. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you want to improve your written skills for the written test coming up, take the free diagnostic test on concourscoach.com. It'll show you exactly what to focus on next. Thank you for listening very much. Thank you very much for listening even. And see you next time. Thank you.